A very good afternoon to all the students of class 12. Today I'm going to take up the second lesson, that is Lost Spring, written by Anish Jung, an Indian author. So just to begin with, first of all we just look at the title, that is Lost Spring, and these are stories of stolen childhood. Now, as if we go back to your poetry section, My Mother at 66, I told you that how, a man's life can be divided according to the seasons. So, spring is supposed to be the childhood. Then summer is the youth. Then autumn is when old age sets in, and winter is the end of life or death, as we say. So, lost spring. Now here in this chapter, the writer has taken up the cause of these children who are living in abject poverty and grinding poverty, and they have no means, of earning a proper livelihood, or they are not being sent to school, they are deprived of their basic rights, and they don't have any basic amenities. So she's taken up the cause of such people with two cases. One is about a rag picker sahib, and the other is about a person called Mukesh, whose family tradition is to make glass bangles in the renowned place of Firozabad. So as I was saying, that Lost Spring symbolizes their lost childhood. They have lost their childhood because they have not lived their childhood as normal children, as you all and people who are better off and well-to-do, their children live, So they have been deprived of everything, and their childhood is lost somewhere, while they're trying to earn money, while they're trying to work in these hazardous conditions, despite the fact that there is a law that, against child labor. But still, sometimes these people are totally ignorant about their rights, and they are not aware that this is illegal, and children should not be working in these hazardous conditions. So she has taken up a cause with two people representing the entire, that strata of society. Now, stories of stolen childhood. Now, the word stolen. Lost is when you've lost something that you've not actually got with you now, and it's not there any longer. So that is for the children who have lost their childhood because they've never seen that childhood. It's over for them. They've not seen that basic niceties of childhood, the joys, the pleasures of playing, of dreaming, of having fun, of having a good time. They have not seen because they are slogging. They are slogging for survival. They are slogging to supplement income, towards the family. So that is why it's lost spring. That's their childhood has got lost in all these trials and tribulations of life. Stolen childhood would mean that their childhood had been stolen from them. Now this is, a thing that is directed towards the people who are in power, the policymakers, the politicians, the bureaucrats, and all these affluent people who should do something for the cause of these people and not let things go astray like that, because they also have every right to live a dignified life and to actually, live their childhood in the proper manner as a child should. So these people are the ones who've stolen their childhood away from them. Because, when you employ children, you don't have to pay them a very heavy amount. In a meager amount, these children are ready to work because they get a paltry amount, and then they also get meals along with them. So that, they are forced into this kind of exploitation. Now with this chapter, I would like to, sometimes for your writing skills, you do get things about slum areas and about poverty and all that. Now, and about child labor and human trafficking. So here I would just like to suggest a name to you, and you all must be aware of Kailash Satyarthi, a Nobel Prize winner, Peace Prize winner. He got this Nobel Peace Prize in 2014 along with Malala Yousafzai. So one was from Pakistan and one was from India, who got the Nobel Peace Prize. And it's ironic when both the countries are almost at war with each other. So these two people, they got the Nobel Peace Prize, and Kailash Satyarthi has done a lot to, rescue these children. Till now, I think he's rescued more than 86,000 children. And he's actually done a lot. He's carried out huge processions, to make people aware in India and internationally also. And even in the International Labour Organization, his attempt has been recognized. And bonded labor child labor is actually an offense today. So like we see, these small little boys, these so-called mundus as we call them, in restaurants, in hotels, or making these crackers in these factories and rolling beedies and various other, glass factories. So all these children are basically living a life of exploitation, poverty, misery, suffering, where they should be out in the open and enjoying the very phase of childhood. So this name is very important. You must remember Kailash Satyarthi actually did a lot. And though this is not pertaining to the chapter, but it's always nice to discuss things and, make you aware that once when Kailash Satyarthi went to school, now he was a Brahmin by caste. So outside the school, he saw a father, a shoe shine, polishing shoes, and his little son sitting beside him. He was also polishing shoes. So he must have gone and asked his father that why does this child not come to school? And then he came to know that they don't have finances, so they are not able to educate their child. So right from that childhood, that impression on his mind about this kind of a divide and this kind of a discrimination, it had a great impact on him. And so when he grew up, despite being an engineer and things like that, he gave up his job and he dedicated his life and to the betterment of these children. So it's very important that people come forward and actually give back their dignity, their self-respect, and the basic amenities of life should be given to them. Now, this chapter, it is an extract from Anis Jung's book, Lost Spring and Stories of Childhood, as I just said. In this, the poet expresses her concern. She's, because an Indian, so she's very, very well familiar. She expresses a concern over the exploitation of children, in these hazardous jobs and these difficult lifestyles that they are leading, which is far away from, happiness, joy, or innocence. So she argues that the loss of childhood innocence and education is a right of every child. So why should it not be given to them? Why should they be working in these dismal conditions, and why should they be accepting poverty and exploitation? Okay, so now we go on to the chapter. So the author, the narrator, she encounters this rag picker whose name is Sahib, and the irony in his name, as we come to know as we proceed in the chapter, is Sahib-e-Alam, which means the Lord of the Universe. But that is highly ironical because he's not the Lord of the Universe. He's living in absolute penury, absolute poverty. He's a rag picker. He goes scrounging for things, looking for things in the garbage dumps. So the author asks, the narrator asks Sahib that what is he scrounging for? Now scrounging is looking for, you're trying to obtain something, and especially if you're looking for something like food or you're looking for money. So pertaining to that. Then she comes to know that basically, when she asks him more about his life, then she comes to know that basically their family has shifted from Dhaka, and they are basically refugees. Why? Because they had to leave their country on account of a natural calamity when storms and rain washed away their fields. So they had no place to go to. So they eventually came to India, and the whole lot that came. So they are all residing on the periphery or the outskirts of Delhi, and the name is Seema Puri. So there are more than 10,000 rag pickers, and they've been living there for more than 30 years. Now, despite being there for 30 years, They don't have a proper house. They are living in literally hovels and, shacks kind of a thing, which are covered with tarpaulin. That is a sheet, waterproof sheet to keep away the rain. And there is, the choked drains and unhygienic conditions where animals and human beings are coexisting side by side, despite the very fact that we can say Delhi is the capital of India. And we see huge buildings. We see on one side there's so much of progress and the elite and the affluent staying there. And on the other side, you have the dwellings of these rag pickers. So their life is spent scrounging, looking for things in the garbage dump. So they're basically refugees. Now, this child is interested to go to school. He is interested to learn, which we come to know from the fact that when the narrator says, why don't you go to school? So he says, there's no school in the neighborhood. So she says, if I open a school, would you come? Now, that was a very hollow kind of a picture to give to the child, because he readily agreed, and she knew that she would never be opening a school, and she felt ashamed of making such a, making up such a question. Okay. Now, we see signs of poverty in the entire chapter as we come to know all these rag pickers. They come out early, and by 12 they're back, because by that time the sun is scorching hot, so they can't go around in that heat. And especially they're all walking barefooted, because they don't have shoes, they don't have slippers, they don't have chappals. So they're walking around bare feet. And the excuses that one child gives the excuse that my mother had kept them on the shelf, so maybe he just had one little pair which they must have kept, when they have to go out somewhere, or maybe it was just a made-up story. And in order to cover up for their perpetual means continuous poverty, they just said that it's a tradition to walk barefooted. Okay. Then we again come to know that the author gives a picture that with the passage of time, she talks about this young boy who was a priest's son and used to stay in that temple complex, and she had seen that little boy praying for a pair of shoes, and finally he did get them, and that was the condition. But then after many years, when she gets back to the same temple, it's a site of desolation now, emptiness, loneliness. It's not like what it used to be, and there's a big change, because now the new priest, his son, goes to school well dressed in a proper uniform and proper shoes and socks. So that change has come over in with the passage of time. And she also notices plastic chairs around the place, which once were absolutely absent. Okay. But the plight of these rag pickers has not changed, because they are still walking barefooted. That means they still do not have money, or their survival for them is actually a big fight, a big burden. Okay. Then, as I told you, it's all about Simapuri and how, in what conditions they live. And rag picking has two connotations, one for the children and one for the elders. For the elders, it's a means of survival, to sustain themselves, because they earn their livelihood from that. You know how these rag pickers go around, collecting empty bottles, plastic bottles or other bottles, or, these cardboards or these cartons that we have, and then they go and sell them. Okay, so that is a livelihood for them. But for children, it's like a, the garbage is like a wonder heap for them, because when they scrounge through it, sometimes they're lucky enough to get a 1 rupee coin, or if they're very lucky, sometimes even a 10 rupee note, or then, things that we discard and throw away, maybe, used toys or broken shoes, or, something like that. And that is a wonder heap for them, because these children are deprived of everything in life. So it's a wonder heap for them, whereas for the elders, it's a means of survival. Now, so that 1 rupee coin or the 10 rupee note, motivates them to scrounge more and more. And, for them, that is their life. Okay. Okay. Then there is another mention of Sahib watching these boys playing tennis. Now, everybody has dreams and everybody has aspirations and desires, So, I mean, even though he knew that it was a far-fetched dream for him, but he was interested in it and he watched them, and he enjoyed watching those boys playing. But he knew that he could never be able to achieve that dream. What he sufficed with was the charity that he got, the tennis shoes that he got, despite the fact that there was a hole in one of them. But then that was a dream come true to wear those tennis shoes, even though it had a hole in it. So accepting whatever came their way and depending on charity. So they found joys in small things. I mean, like finding these, getting these pair of shoes, even though it had a hole in it. And the poverty in another, we saw that another boy was wearing mismatched shoes, So, I mean, whatever they got, they tried to be happy with that. Then, as with the passage of time, then we see that Sahib gave up rag picking and he's picked up a job at a tea stall. So, though he's earning 800 rupees a month, but he's not so happy. And that unhappiness is depicted that the steel canister that he carries is heavier than his plastic bag, which he used to carry on his shoulder to put in everything that he found in the garbage dump. Now here we see that Sahib is not happy. Why? Because earlier he was his own master. He did whatever he wanted to, and he was not controlled by anybody else. But now we see that the owner of the tea stall controls him. So he's not free any longer. He's lost his freedom, and but the only consolation is that at least he gets some ready cash with which he can, look after the needs of the family and supplement the income of the family. Now here, before I end this part, I would just like to just suggest, tell you the difference between freedom and independence. Independence is the ability to be free and free from outside control. Nobody controls you from outside. Whereas freedom is to do what you like within the borders of your ability. That is your freedom. Just for information. Okay. So we see how this rag picker, and generally this means the lives of all the rag pickers who are living around in Simapuri or even elsewhere in other places also. Like you have slums in almost all the areas, and you've heard of Dharavi in Mumbai, so the biggest slum in Asia. So all these people, they're really living a very difficult life, and there's no community sanitation, unhygienic conditions, and the other important part that was there was that they don't have any identity of their own. What do they have? They only have ration cards. So that was a dig at the people in power. These ration cards means that they have the right to vote. So this is also a political gimmick kind of a thing, that they're enrolled for the ration card, so they're getting ration, and only for the big reason that they will be a huge vote bank for these politicians during elections. Because these people can, be... if we can use the word bribed, or they, very easily by giving them things, and they can vote in favor of the person. So it's really sad that they're used as a vote bank, but nobody actually goes out of the way to help them out and to improve their conditions. Now we move on to the other character or other person that Anish Jung has chosen, and that is Mukesh. And Mukesh has a dream in his eyes, and he wants to become a motor mechanic, and he wants to learn to drive a car. Now here they say his dream looks like a mirage. It looks like a mirage is something which is it's an illusion. Like in a desert, you can see that there's water, but when you go there, there's nothing. So it's an illusion. But why this has been used here? Because generation to generation, Mukesh's family has only made glass bangles, and they have lived in that condition, perpetually in a condition of poverty, misery, and they've not been able to bring themselves up, or they've not been able to raise their standard. But it's a tradition, hereditary tradition that is being carried on, that the sons and the children ahead will only make bangles. Now here they come, the writer, introduces us to his family. There's an old, the old father, then the bahu of the house, and the old grandmother is there, and then that little girl. Another person that they introduce in between is Savita. So this all talks about the glass bangles that are made in Firozabad of all colors, all rainbow hues. The 7 colors of the rainbow. So all colors are made over there. And what has been highlighted by the writer is that these people, the Mukesh's family, they are so ignorant, and they are illiterate first, and then they are so ignorant, and none of them know that it is illegal for children to work in glass furnaces. Why? Number one, because there's very high temperature. Number two, they're working in dingy cells where there is no light. Number three, there is no ventilation, and the temperatures inside are very high because the hot furnaces are there. And the other reason is that they turn blind very soon, because they lose their eyesight. So they're giving joy to the world. They're giving bangles to the world. Women use them as the accessories, and especially they have mentioned here the tradition that we have of the suhagan. The suhagan has to wear these glass bangles, and but the irony is that Savita, this little one, doesn't even know the sanctity of these bangles. Maybe when she grows up and she wears them on her wrist, she realize when she becomes a bride. And ultimately what will happen? Those bangles will be on her wrist, yes. Even when she grows old, like that old grandmother, they will be on her wrist. But the irony is in the whole thing is that there will be no eyesight, okay? And there will be no improvement in their conditions. So that is one thing. And then they have also spoken about in detail, given about those, hovels that they are living in. Walls are crumbling, the doors are wobbly, shaky, they might fall down any moment. And many, many members of the family are living, in a claustrophobic room together like that. And they have very little to eat, not even a proper 1 square meal a day. So all they're impoverished bangle makers. And to that extent that throughout his life, the old man has worked, in making these bangles, but he's not been able to renovate his house. He's not been able to send both his sons to school. So life is back to square one only. So as they were, they're still the same. There is no improvement. Now, another interesting point that the writer has brought out through Mukesh's grandmother. Now, the grandmother says that it is his karam, his destiny, So they believe that God has destined, bangle making is the only way in which they can survive. And the condition that they are in, this is all karma or destiny. But here we can also say that man is the architect of his own future, of his own destiny, of his own fate. If you have, the will to rise and the will to change, then definitely you can change and you can improve your conditions. Now here, another important thing is the fear that they had. The fear of the policemen, the fear of the middlemen, the fear of all these stronghold politicians and men, that they could never muster enough courage. Because when the author asks him that why don't you form a cooperative? A cooperative is an autonomous association of various members who voluntarily join to meet their common interests, whether it is economic, whether it is social, or whether it is cultural. Like you must be knowing that how this Gujarat Anand Dairy, how it works on a cooperative basis, how all the women bring in the milk and then they give it there, and today they are, self-reliant. So cooperative societies are a must, but they fear them because they say that they are curbed because the policemen will haul them and they will consider it to be an illegal act and they'll throw them behind the bars. So they have not been able to muster enough courage, and fear is a big obstacle in the lives of these people. Another point is that there is no leader, nobody to guide them, nobody to lead them. They're all sailing in the same boat. And these money lenders, the sahukars that they have spoken about here, they're the money lenders. Because they're illiterate people, they take a lot of amount from them and they make them put their thumb impression. They don't know about the calculation. They don't know how much they've returned, how much they've taken. So they are cheated. And the middlemen exploit these people. Who are the middlemen? The people who buy from the producers. And then these middlemen, after buying from the producers and giving them a certain amount, then they sell it to the consumers or the retail people. So as a result, the middlemen earn more profit and the producers hardly get anything. So this is also a form of exploitation. Now, so we can see that basically when we spoke about the destiny and, the grandmothers talking about, so their perception is very ironic because, they've not been able to do anything, and even after making these bangles and even after getting married or something, they're still living in those, miserable conditions, deplorable conditions, where they're losing out on their eyesight and they have to sleep on an empty stomach. So, they're literally, as we can say, they are not living, they're just existing. So, people have to actually rise from this or muster enough courage, or somebody, the so-called people, so-called reformers, somebody who should, have some kind of empathy for these people and try to elevate them from this condition, from this terrible condition that they are living in. Now here, as the chapter closes, there is a reference about Mukesh's dream. Now here the dream we see is, Mukesh sees a dream, yes, but the dream he sees is very much attainable, because how we know that? Because when the author asked him about flying an aeroplane, he refuses. He knows his limits. Becoming a mechanic and learning to ride a car, it's okay. But to fly an aeroplane is beyond his means and beyond his reach. So he is very, very grounded, we can see, and his dream that he has seen is within approach. So if he keeps his willpower strong and he tries to break away from the tradition, somebody has to take the initiative. Somebody has to take the first step. And that is why the author is very happy when she comes to know that Mukesh is planning to become a motor mechanic and learning to drive a car. So she's very happy that at least somebody is taking the initiative and the step, which might pave the way for the others also. So this was basically the lesson that we spoke about. Now here we come on to the theme. Now Law Spring deals with the miserable plight of these street children who are forced into labor early in life, during their childhood period, and they are denied the opportunity of schooling. And the author has taken the examples of Sahib-e-Alam, a rag picker, and Mukesh, a bangle maker. And both of them, that is Mukesh and Sahib, they are, controlled by a vicious circle of social stigma, poverty and exploitation. Sahib does give up rag picking in favor of a job at a tea stall, but then he, in the long run, loses his freedom. But then he's paying a price for that, and he lost his freedom. Now Mukesh wants to be a motor mechanic, and both of them, they have the ardent desire to study, to rise in life, to better their prospects, to move on and not carry on with the same age-old tradition of bangle making or living in poverty and misery. The Sahib and Mukesh, they represent the growing number of refugees, the migrants, and poor who are being forced to a life of penury. Then the other theme which runs parallel to the major theme is the callousness of society. I think with you I did those three words: sympathy, empathy, and apathy. Sympathy is having pity, simply having pity. Empathy is to step into the shoes and feel the pain. But apathy is totally different. Apathy means indifferent, not concerned. So here, the next to this major theme is the theme of the callousness of society, the indifference of society towards these people, especially the political class. So there is an utter lack of compassion, empathy, and commitment for the upliftment of these people, and it's very, very sad because lots of schemes are there for the poor, but maybe they are just in black and white, and these schemes don't reach down to that strata of society. So the Lost Spring symbolizes, or that let's all work for the cause of these children and not let them lose their childhood. Let them have their childhood as it is supposed to be. So the writer wants to sensitize the readers to the miserable plight of these poor people, and to lay emphasis on the fact that something needs to be done for them very, very urgently to bring them out of this vicious cycle of exploitation. And how can that be done? Basically through education, awareness, and cooperative organization. And yes, if they have education, then obviously empowerment. So these are the various ways in which the author has brought out the theme in these lessons. Okay, title. As the title Lost Spring, it has a tinge of irony. Poor thing. That spring, because spring is the best season of the year, and when it's spring, everything springs back to life after a dull and barren winter. So it's full of color, fragrance, and freshness, and it is also a season for renewal and growth. But the childhood of human life is associated with spring, as it marks the beginning of human life. But here, in the case of these children, they are nowhere close to any kind of, happiness or joy or growth or pleasure or play. And they are being deprived. Millions of these children are being deprived. And they experience no spring in their lives, because their childhood is consumed in making a living for their childhood, for their families, to supplement the income, because otherwise they are literally living a hand-to-mouth situation. So education, play, and pleasure are not for them to enjoy. So it is the society who can actually, come together and try to uplift them and support these people. So the title brings about the deprivation that is there in the lives of these people, and that we need to do something about them. So I hope you've understood the chapter. So now I'm going to take up the question answers of the lesson Lost Spring. Okay. First question. What is Sahib looking for in the garbage dumps? Where is he and where has he come from? Sahib is a rag picker in the author's neighborhood. He lives in Simapuri, which is a sprawling slum on the outskirts of Delhi. He basically belongs to Bangladesh and is a Bangladeshi refugee who has migrated to Delhi from Dhaka in 1971 due to a natural calamity. The author says that Sahib scrounges for gold in the garbage. Gold here does not mean literally gold. Now this is a hyperbole and exaggeration. Gold is not the actual yellow metal, but something, which is valuable to these children, like clothes or shoes or toys or bits of metal and plastic scrap, etc. Okay. Next question. What explanation does the author offer for the children not wearing footwear? The author has seen several children walking on the road barefooted during her travels across India, And when she asks them, she is told that it is an ancient tradition. But she believes that in India, staying barefoot is perhaps a forced necessity, and because of the perpetual poverty, than a faithful adherence to old traditions. So it's just a cover-up. Okay. Is Sahib working at the tea? Is Sahib happy working at the tea stall? Explain. No, in my view, Sahib is not happy working at the tea stall. Because like all other children, Sahib also wishes to lead a happy and carefree life, not be subjected to any kind of outside authority. So, but he is forced to take up this job at a tea stall because it provides him with 800 rupees a month and also meals. And the only thing that gives him a little bit of consolation is the food and the money. Otherwise, he is not happy because working at a tea stall, he is bound. And he was a free-spirited bird, only answerable to himself. But now he has to, take orders from somebody else. Okay. Mention the hazards of working in the glass bangle industry. The glass bangle industry in Firozabad is a disorganized sector. Why? Because it does not have a proper infrastructure nor basic amenities, facilities. These areas are ill-lit, ill-ventilated, and the glass blowing furnaces, the temperature is very high, and they are actually working in dingy hovels with high temperature and in unhygienic conditions. And they do not have any kind of protective eye gear when they're soldering the pieces of bangle together. When they're joining them, they don't have any protective eye gear. And the working hours are very, very long, and their back-breaking postures lead them to lose their eyesight and makes them old at a very early age. Explain the use of literary devices in the sentence, an army of barefoot boys who appear like the morning birds and disappear at noon. Now, this sentence contains two literary devices. One is metaphor and the other one is simile. The author uses the metaphor of army to describe a group of rag pickers, who come to scrounge in these garbage dumps in the streets of Delhi. Then she uses the simile, like birds, to describe the manner in which these rag pickers, they come and they look for whatever they are, whatever they can lay their hands on in the garbage dumps, like the scavenger birds. Why are they being compared to birds? Because scavenger birds who haunt these dumps. Just like the birds, the ragpicker boys, they are free-spirited and they enjoy and revel in their freedom. Whenever they want to come, they come, and whenever they want to leave, they leave. Okay. Why do slums like Simapuri mushroom around big cities? Now, there is a lot of inflow from neighboring countries like Bangladesh and Nepal to India, and migration from villages to towns, to metropolitan cities. Also within India, they all come here in search of livelihood, to earn money, and their existence, is an endless phenomenon. So this migratory population that comes in, they settle on the periphery of the big cities and they start doing menial and odd jobs to earn a living. And these are illegal settlements or slums around all these big cities. Like I said, Dharavi in Mumbai and Simapuri bordering Delhi are some glaring examples. Okay. Next question. Despite being refugees, how do people in Simapuri have ration cards? The refugee population of Simapuri represents a large vote bank, as I told you, for various political parties. And at some stages, these illegal occupants of government land around cities, they are provided ration cards to benefit political sharks, so to speak, in the election process. And using these cars, they can get grains from the government agencies, and that is enough for them, because at least they get some food to eat, some ration to eat. Why does the author describe children of slums as partners in survival? Now, in most families, the middle class families especially, children are precious beings, and they're cared for, they're nurtured, and they're looked after right from their infancy. In the upper middle class, the middle class or the upper middle class, and of course the affluent, they go beyond all limitations in bringing up their children. They get all the luxury, all the comfort, all the basic amenities. So these children are dependent on their parents for all their needs, in all forms, be it nourishment, or be it health, be it education, be it shelter. But all these children in Simapuri, or these, all these refugees, they are offsprings, they are homeless rag pickers. As it is, they moved away from their basic home. So they're homeless rag pickers. And due to extreme poverty, their parents are unable to provide for them, whatever is required, the basic things. So they end up rag picking, at an early age for their survival, and also as a support for their parents. Why does garbage have a different meaning for rag picking children, and how do elders and children look at garbage differently? Okay, for the elders, rag picking is a means of survival. It's a necessary evil, a means of survival, as it provides them their daily bread. They're able to earn their livelihood. But on the other hand, these rag pickers, these children, in their innocence view, the garbage is a mine of gold for them, is a wonder heap for them. Why? Because they marvel at whatever little things they find in the garbage dump. Maybe a coin or a currency note, or maybe, some toy or some shoes or some other things which they really are very much fascinated by. So for them, garbage is wrapped in wonder. Is Mukesh's sister-in-law, that is the Bhabi's life, different from Mukesh? Now, Mukesh's sister-in-law is almost as old as Mukesh. She is a frail young girl, very, very thin young girl, but who at an early age is shouldering the responsibility of the house, or the bahu of the house. Unlike girls of her age, who work in glass furnaces, she cooks, she cleans, and she looks after Mukesh's family, okay, with the grandparents, with the parents, and the elder brother. Her life is not very much different from Mukesh, as instead of working in a hovel like the glass furnace, she works in a hovel-like home, where, so many members living in just one room, and, where we have a fuel stove. Imagine, on one side we have affluent people living in Delhi, and the capital, so-called, with prosperity and progress and, a name. And on the periphery, you still have people who are burning fuel stoves. There's so much smoke. It's so difficult to cook food in such conditions. So she is also working in a hovel-like home, and she represents that strata of women, or that tribe of women who are neither seen nor heard, but they only exist. Because remember that I spoke about the whale and everything. Okay. How does Mukesh's grandmother view the family occupation of bangle making and its poverty? Mukesh's grandmother views bangle making as the destiny of a family, the karma, the destiny. Her husband's blindness, their misfortune, and their impoverished condition, she feels that this is all because of destiny. Years of deprivation and suffering makes her stoically accept everything in the name of karma or fate. And she feels that it's the same for all the bangle makers. Do you think Mukesh is a rebel? Do you agree? Give reasons in support of your answer. Now, Mukesh, like all his other peers, he's born in a poverty-stricken family in a caste of bangle makers. He has received no education like all the other children, and he's become a child laborer and doing back-breaking and mind-numbing work in these glass furnaces. But unlike his peers, there is a spark in his eyes, and he has a dream. And though it seems like an illusion, but if he carries on with this dream and he's steadfast about it and he perseveres to achieve this dream, he will be able to make it. And he will be able to become a motor mechanic. And if he gets a little bit of assistance from here and there and people don't pull him down and he keeps his willpower strong, I'm sure he'll be able to make it. Slums are the ugly underbelly of all big cities the world over. Describe the contrasting world of haves and have-nots treading these two worlds. Now, we can say that the social fabric of the world that we inhabit has been divided into many different headings, but the division on the basis of material wealth is most glaring and common. And we see the stark reality ourselves that world over we are divided into two slots: the people who have things and the people who do not have. So the haves and the have-nots. And all the affluent cities, we can see they are surrounded by slums. Just as a coin has two sides to it, every city has two faces: the bright, the well-lit and the illuminated world of the rich and the affluent, and the dark and the dingy and the depressing world of the poor. And though it is these poor people exist on the periphery, they are constantly yearning, desiring for that bright world which the rich people have. But the rich people are dependent on them to keep their world well scrubbed, well cleaned and well spruced up, So it's ironic that these people are used to brighten up their surroundings, and all the menial jobs are done by these poor people. But nobody cares for their upliftment. The clothes they wear, the cars they drive, the food they eat, the houses that they live in, they're all cleaned and maintained by this category of the poor people, okay? And whatever discarded, clothes that are discarded, things that are discarded, they're given to them in the name of generosity. So they survive on this kind of charity and generosity, and they satisfy their needs because of that. So the slum dwellers have become an intrinsic part of the rich world. Okay, next question. For most women, bangles are dreams in glass. But the bangle makers of Firozabad, they are a vicious circle. They cannot wriggle out. Comment. Bangles of all shades, red, green, blue, yellow, orange, they are a symbol of suhag, in the Indian tradition, the long life of the husband and the auspiciousness in marriage in our country since centuries. In today's world, they are also fashion statement. Now, more than the tradition or the suhag, they're also a fashion statement for the young and old women alike. Now, these glass bangles with various hues, they adorn a woman's wrist and they provide a visual treat. They look so beautiful. So they provide a visual treat and a very, very melodious music also they create with their clinking and tinkling. And these rainbow colors and their bright hues spread joy and happiness in the lives of women. But ironically, little do women know that these bangles that they wear to adorn themselves, and beautify themselves, they don't realize that all these beautiful bangles themselves live a miserable life, Even after so many years of independence, Firozabad, which is the hub of bangle making, is an underdeveloped, backward town with neither any infrastructure nor any basic amenities. It resembles a dumping ground with garbage strewn all over. The glass furnace where these people work are also very ill-lit, ill-ventilated, and like hovels with high temperature. So, and the place where they live is also, almost like a hovel and with crumbling walls, wobbly doors. So, when we wear those bangles, we only admire the beauty of the bangles, but ironically, we don't see the pain and the suffering and the misery behind those bangles, that somebody who's created them has gone through so much. I think that's all, but just for your writing skill also, sometimes if you do get a question about something like this, about, the slum areas and things, so, and what you can do, so at this tender age, you must have that sensitivity to reach out to these people and think about them, and whatever means you have to come in to actually help them out, and maybe through education or sponsoring education, not by giving donation or charity. And here I would like to tell you that in the beginning, in the previous video, I had said something about Kailash Satyarthi. So Kailash is also the viewpoint that alms and charity should not be given to the poor. That is not the right thing to do. Why? Because he is basically fighting for their human rights, that they have a right to exist, they have a right to education as constitutionally also. And so these rights are being, taken away from these people, and they're being exploited. So this is very, very true that we have to give them that dignity, that self-respect, and we have to think about these people, that they also have certain human rights to live on this earth, So for your writing skills, you can have something like that, okay? We have to keep our conscience alive, We just can't pay lip service and, not do anything about it. Various NGOs getting together, forming an NGO, trying to lead them, giving them a ray of hope, giving them that courage to dream. So all this is very, very important. Especially these politicians should be taken to task and be asked what they have done for the upliftment of these people. Once before the elections, they take a round and they promise, but all those promises are very, very hollow and very shallow, and they end up doing nothing. So these people have to be made aware, they have to be, awareness has to be created, education has to be given, and they should be, given that moral support so that the misery in their lives can come to an end. Well, I think that's all. Thank you very much for watching. God bless you all.